Hello, welcome back to my channel. This is my first tripod experience, although it's not even really a tripod. You are on top of a pile of books. And so it is not my first tripod experience, but it is my first stable camera experience, which is definitely a move in the right direction until I get a actual tripod. So, I wanted to make this video to talk about a lot of things that I've been thinking about in regards to books and reading and even writing, because I definitely have had a lot on my mind lately. With the pandemic and everything that's going on, it's given me a lot more time to read and to think about literature and other topics, to really discover topics that have interested me, but I haven't been able to delve into as deeply as I would like due to lack of time. Now I have all the time in the world here, and we have all this time that we're spending inside, so it's good, good reading, good learning, good studying time. So without further ado, let me go through my book haul, because I think in going through my book haul, I will encounter subjects that I've been thinking about, and I'll just bring them up as they come up with the different books that I show you. So I've ordered a lot of these books online, although I have been to some bookstores lately, which, I have these sort of mixed feelings about, because I am very much of the mindset that we need to practice social distancing during this pandemic, and we also need to probably societally stop going out so much. Really staying at home, I think, is a good idea towards you know what do they call it, squashing the curve, or bringing down the curve, whatever the the term is. It kind of escaped my mind right now. So yeah, I am a proponent of that type of scientifically backed safety. I don't mean to suggest that I'm not, but going to a bookstore to me is a sort of while it is a risk, it's something that I feel like in our capitalist society, in a society that's going to have these issues anyway, it at least allows me to patronize small bookstores and other shops that are struggling to stay open. So I try to look at it from that perspective. And of course, we practice safety in the bookstores. I tend to hope that bookstore patrons are conscientious and considerate people who follow safety protocols. So while I do go to the bookstore and it is an acknowledged risk, I do practice safety by wearing the mask and social distancing from other customers. So yeah, I just thought that those are interesting waters to have to navigate as a book lover. Are you going to go to the bookstores? Because the bookstores are open, but are you going to go? I think it's a personal question for a lot of people. It's a personal decision that has to be made. So these are things that I have picked up. First, currently, what I'm reading right now is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë. I am about pretty close to being midway through this book. My first time reading Jane Eyre, and I must say that I'm enjoying it immensely. It is not my first Brontë book. My first Brontë book, which I will get to in a minute, is actually Wuthering Heights, and I recently read that particular novel, and that was my first Brontë book. This is not quite like Wuthering Heights. There's a more conventional quality to this narrative. Wuthering Heights Wuthering Heights was so impassioned that it verged on the almost avant-garde in my opinion, and it was so passionate and extreme in its emotions that it almost bordered on the avant-garde. So I'm not quite getting that with this. That's what I mean when I say that this is a bit more of a conventional type of narrative, but there is similarities between the two in terms of the Gothic element and the element of romance, which Jane Eyre is, I wouldn't quite classify it as a romance, although there is romance in it, but Wuthering Heights certainly I would not qualify as a romance. I think that they tended, these works tend to be kind of like lumped into that sort of category and have that perception within the popular culture, but I think that has a lot to do with the fact that these books were written by women, and the only comfortable way that a patriarchal reading society could categorize books written by women was predominantly as romances. And I think if you look deeper into the text, neither one are actually romances. So I got Jane Eyre, and then I found this great looking book just on the shelf at one of the half-price books. It's called The Secret History of Jane Eyre, How Charlotte Brontë Wrote Her Masterpiece by John Forder. I messed up the name, and I'm gonna probably mess it up, but you can see right there. Fordresher, I believe, something like that. And this looks really interesting, a sort of backstory, or not backstory, but the story behind the story. I also got this book called Brontosaurus, the Brontosaurus, a funny little name, and an A to Z of Charlotte and Emily and Anne Brontë, Anne Branwell in little parentheses. Poor Branwell. Towered over by these literary geniuses. John Sutherland is the author of this book. And in the back, it seems kind of interesting. It said, did Charlotte Brontë take opium? Did Reverend Brontë carry a loaded pistol? What precisely does Wuthering mean? I know what Wuthering means, but, you know, this book sort of seems like a more tidbits about, biographical tidbits type of book. Sort of like interesting facts about their lives, which I am very fascinated by the Brontes. I find their story as a family and as individuals to be quite tragic and beautiful and brilliant, but ultimately quite sad and in many instances quite harsh. The reality of their life was quite harsh and brutal, and there was a lot of pain there, which just fascinates me. So I'm eager to learn more about them biographically from this book. The other thing that I found, so let's talk about Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is a book that I just finished, and I found this great old-fashioned, it's this Rainbow Classics book edition of Wuthering Heights, and you can see it has, the cover's practically falling apart, but it's bound together. Someone took the time to kind of put plastic on it and preserve it. And as you can see, the book is illustrated, and while there are a few black and white images, look at that, that's a great image of Mr. Lockwood, I believe his name is. Excuse me while I look for something. Yes, Mr. Lockwood is the newcomer to the area, and he visits his landlord, Heathcliff, at Wuthering Heights at the opening of the story. And so in this picture, you have Mr. Lockwood, where was it? Mr. Lockwood being assaulted by a ghost out his window at night. If you remember that episode, if you've read Wuthering Heights. And so it has these black and white illustrations peppered throughout, and then it has these gorgeous like watercolor colored illustrations with sort of a caption underneath, a line of text that this sort of envisions artistically. So it's a great edition of Wuthering Heights. I really enjoyed these depictions of the scenes within the novel. And boy, what a novel. Honestly, this book means so much to me. I had never read it before prior to this, and I had certain preconceptions based on what I was just telling you about the Brontes and sort of the genre that we lump them in for romance and sort of gothic. You know, I read a review, I'm not going to tell you who wrote it, but I read a review. It was actually by someone that I respect, but I totally disagreed with them in their interpretation of this book. I was like, did you even read the book? When they wrote this, but it said that the Wuthering Heights, that the subtext is sex, pure and simple. And honestly, I do think that there is a sexual subtext, maybe, but it's so much deeper than that. It's so far beyond sex that I don't see how that could be your main takeaway from the book. Certainly, it's a powerful aspect of the novel. In terms of like a humanistic sort of interpretation, but on the humanistic level, it's far deeper than just sex. It's about a metaphysical type of view of life and of love and of human emotion. And the novel actually shocked me. I was shocked by Wuthering Heights. I encountered such extreme heights, heights, you know, no pun intended, of human passion that it was almost kind of quite frightening at places at certain points in the novel. Honestly, when I finished it, I felt like I felt after I finished reading, after I finished watching Requiem for a Dream by Darren Aronofsky. It was something that you experience, and it took a lot out of me. I could not read it took me a long time to read the book. It took me 2 weeks. Normally I could probably finish a book like this in a shorter amount of time, but 2 weeks I had to like read a chapter, take a break, read a chapter, take a break. I had to take it in small doses because it was just so overwhelming and so dark. Like I was that's what impressed me most about it, was that it was so dark and it wasn't afraid to like go there. I mean, I made a list of the things that this thing encompasses, and we're talking like child abuse, racism, animal torture, grave desecration, ghosts, starvation, self-induced starvation, mental illness. We're talking about just alcoholism, these really heavy, dark themes in the book. Imprisonment, you know, there's a point where a character like basically kidnaps another character, lures them to their house, and then doesn't let them leave. And it's just so, physical violence, emotional manipulation. There's so many dark elements and themes to this book, and it was just overwhelming. So I highly encourage this book. I mean, I know in the beginning it was a little difficult to get into it because you're struggling to find out the relationships between these characters. It's not explicitly clear who's who and what their relationship to so-and-so is, but once you get it down, a drama in acts that is just pure, overwhelming. Like I said, it borders on the metaphysical. It transcends sort of the imperfections of its, I can't even think of any imperfections, but I have read some critical analyses that describe it as an imperfect book. To me, it is perfect. It is a beautiful, stunning, dark, burning star of a novel, and I can anticipate reading it at some point again in my life. That's why I got this Norton Critical Edition. I got the Norton Critical Edition because it has notes, really good notes. It has a historical sort of background that I want to read. It has the poems of Wuthering Heights, so there's more than just, it has not Wuthering Heights, of Emily Brontë. And so I want to read this more in-depth critical edition. Emily Brontë is a fascinating figure to me. She only wrote one book, and that to me is just, wow, like, you literally, have made an imprint in world literature with just a single book, and that to me is just mind-blowing. The other mind-blowing aspect of the Brontë sisters in general is that you have these three literary geniuses that come from the same family. They're all from, how rare is that, you know, just to and then not only that they were literary geniuses, but that they were women, and all of that, and all that that entails for that time period, the limitations that were placed on women by the patriarchal society. And proof of that is that these women had to write with male pseudonyms. Emily Brontë had to publish her book under the name Currer Bell. So, because she knew that they wouldn't take her seriously as a writer if they knew that she was female immediately right off the bat. So, I find all of that quite rich and interesting, and it only provides further. Excuse me while I look this up. It only provides further fascination. Or excuse me, Wuthering Heights was by Ellis Bell. I said Currer Bell, but that's actually Jane Eyre. Jane went under the Charlotte went under the pseudonym Currer, and then Wuthering Heights was under Ellis, and then Agnes Grey, Acton Bell. That was Anne Brontë. So they had to write under male names. So that's proof positive of the existence of these sorts of limitations on female writers of their time period. And they just transcended all of that by sheer force of imagination. And I find that quite beautiful and quite fascinating. I found another edition of Wuthering Heights that is illustrated. Oh my God, and look at the layout. It's like a student text, but it's one that you can highlight in, write in, take notes in the margins. Not that I'm gonna write on it, but because I love this edition so much, but just the illustrations is enough to make me wanna buy this. And there's like notes at the bottom, like little footnotes, and there's commentary in the back. So it's sort of like a workbook dedicated entirely to Wuthering Heights. I'm gonna end this video and start part 2 soon, but the other thing that I want to tell you in relation to Brontë, and I'm sort of just zooming right through my thoughts on Brontë, I could literally talk for hours about my love and fascination for the Brontë sisters, but I won't do that to you. I'm just gonna do the highlights, and part of that is this find. It is an illustrated version of Jane Eyre. Oh my God, illustrated by Dame Darcy. Dame Darcy, I believe, is the creator of a tarot deck that I've actually have been looking at, called the Dame Darcy Mermaid Tarot, I believe it's called. In any case, this book is illustrated. Look how big it is, and look how fascinating it looks. You have these beautiful like illustrations interspersed throughout the text, and then you have these great like color illustrations. I haven't looked through all of these because I just got this book, but you know, these glossy kind of pages in between the text, and they're like full page illustrations, color illustrations, and then you got like the black and white illustrations. So it's just amazing. And I'm gonna finish reading Jane Eyre, because I have the 2 copies. I have that copy and I have this copy, and I've been reading out of this, but this is just straight up text. And so I think what I'm gonna do is I'm going to maybe switch back and forth so I can see what's illustrated as I go along. I'll review chapters. So I'll read a chapter out of here, and then I'll flip through the chapter here to see if there's any illustrations in it. Or maybe I'll just read it out of here. I don't know. I'm undecided, but these are the sorts of decisions that I agonize over, and it's funny. I'm totally a nerd like that. So, yeah, that's my fascination and obsession with the Brontes, and Jane Eyre is right now the thing that I'm really into. So let me end this video here because I don't want to run over time and then it just cuts out. So I'm gonna end this video and then I'll see you in part 2, which I will be posting right after this one. So thank you for listening and see you in part 2.